Hey everybody, and welcome to another JavaScript Jabber. We are here live at Microsoft Build, and I'm talking to Steve Faulkner. Steve, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Steve.
Get a user's eye view of your front-end services with DataDog Synthetics. Automatically test your application endpoints with simulated traffic from global locations, allowing your teams to proactively identify and improve issues before they affect your customers. Plus, build multi-step browser tests simply by interacting with your application. DataDog will record your actions and automatically execute the tests. Intelligently adapt to changes in your UI along the way. Proactively monitor user experience today with a 14-day free trial of Datadog by visiting dtdg.co. That's Datadog without the vowels. dtdg.co/JavaScript Jabber. They'll give you a free t-shirt for taking out a trial.
So what do you do for Microsoft?
So I'm the maintainer of the JavaScript SDK for Cosmos.
Okay.
So if you're using JavaScript and using Cosmos, then you're using the code I wrote. There's a couple other people that help out too, but that's my primary role.
Good deal. So we're going to be talking about Cosmos DB, and let's kind of dive in and just kind of get the basics out of the way. We've talked about it at previous conferences, but we always have new listeners. So let's get the basics out of the way, and then we can go deep and talk about what you can actually do with it.
Cool. So Cosmos is a multi-model distributed NoSQL database.
That's a lot of words.
It's a lot of stuff to unpack. So it is fundamentally just a document store.
Okay.
You read JSON, you write JSON, and it gets stored in a document format in a database.
Sounds like Mongo, except Mongo uses a binary version of JSON.
Yeah, it's definitely like in the same vein as Mongo. But the difference is that we sort of have it's a service, right?
Right.
So it's all based on consumption as well. So you set a level of RUs, request units. There's no provisioning VMs or doing anything like that.
Thank heaven.
Yeah, beyond that.
That's a headache.
But then we are in every region in Azure, and you can read and write in every region. So we have multi-master, read and write.
Gotcha.
And then on top of that, we expose your data in a bunch of APIs. So the primary kind of main API is a SQL API. So it's not a SQL database, but it's just a SQL interface to your data.
Right. I understand it was modeled after Postgres.
Yeah. So, you can't do things like joins because it's not SQL under the hood.
Okay, fair.
But, if you want to do select star from where, order by, right, that stuff all works.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the primary API.
So your joins are, I do a query and then I do another query.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's ways to do joins on a document, like you can join a document to itself a little bit. So there is minimal join support, but really if you're traversing relationships, like in a graph of data, then you're going to just do multiple queries.
Okay.
It's partitioned, so everything you put in the database has an ID and a partition key. And so, anything like out there that is a partition data store people are familiar with works the same way. And then we also have these other APIs that we expose on top of it. So a lot of people come and they say, well, we already do a bunch of Cassandra. So, we have a Cassandra API. So if you want to move Cassandra workload over to Cosmos, it's very easy to do. We have a lot of people doing that very successfully.
Nice.
Cassandra, Mongo, Gremlin. We just released a new API for SPARC today. So if you have data in Cosmos and you want to analyze it with SPARC, we're going to have full support for SPARC as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I kind of looked through some of the options there, and it was interesting just to see, you can get at your data all these different ways. But underneath, it's just a document store.
Yep, underneath, it's just a document store that all stores the data the same way.
Gotcha. And it only runs in Azure?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's no kind of on-prem option or anything like that right now. So
yeah, I just wanted to clarify that in case people were thinking, okay, I'm just going to get out there and NPM Cosmos DB, and it doesn't work that way.
You should definitely do that, but it won't give you a full database. I'm trying to think if there's any other thing that's kind of critical to know about the service. It's very much designed for a very high throughput and low latency. So we have very strict SLAs around all of our latency metrics, and so if you need you have a lot of data and you need access to that data fast, it's very, very good for that.
Right, and an SLA is a service level agreement, and basically, it's a way of saying, it's going to meet these performance parameters or availability parameters for people who aren't familiar with the term.
Yeah, exactly. So we have, I'm not going to say it exactly because I'll get it definitely wrong. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's under 10 milliseconds for a point read is our guaranteed SLA. And so we have some guarantees around availability and stuff like that. So
right. Cool. So what kinds of things do you see people building on this? Because if it's a document database and you can't do joins and things like that, I can see that for some people that might be a deal killer, right? It's like I have a lot of related data, and so I don't want to do a whole bunch of queries to get all of it in the right way.
Yeah, so this is kind of one of the first things we end up encountering with customers is that they have relational data. And I do think it's a myth that you can't store relational data in a NoSQL database. You just have to think about it a little differently.
Right, fair enough.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time saying, okay, what's the right partition key? Are there ways to store this data in multiple ways maybe? Cosmos has a change feed, so everything that happens in the database can potentially trigger an event downstream,
right,
like an Azure function.
Yeah, I talked to the Azure functions twice.
Got it.
This time around. So keep an eye out for that, folks. But yeah, and we talked a bit about that where, you drop something in Cosmos DB, and then Azure functions picks things up and modifies the database or generates reports or a bazillion other things.
Well, a lot of people just write the data back to Cosmos. So we're creating multiple copies of documents, so you can query it in different ways.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do you get around the joins issue then?
So the first thing you got to think about is sort of how you are going to use the concept of ID and partition key in special ways, right?
And when you say partition key, so that's not something that's generated by the database. It's something that I get to pick.
It is. So we should kind of maybe dive into what partition key is. So, Cosmos is under the hood, split across all of these machines.
Right.
And what machine your data lives on depends on the partition key.
Okay.
Right. So an individual partition can have up to 10 gigabytes of data. So, for example, you can imagine if I have a table that has all of my users' orders, I might partition on user ID. So that way that they're guaranteed to be co-located on the same machine is all of one user's orders. Right, and that allows me to then execute queries against that data very efficiently.
That makes sense. So if I have 1,000 users, then I could have 1,000 partitions?
So that's a partition key is a logical partition, and then under the hood, that maps to physical partitions. So we take your partition key, we hash it, and then that determines where it lives in Cosmos. But we don't really expose any of that.
Right.
It really depends on the amount of data you have and how many RUs you've scaled to. If you have only a few gigs of data, you'll probably only be on one partition.
Right.
If you have terabytes of data, you'll have hundreds of partitions.
That makes sense. So then back to the joins, use a partition key.
Yeah. So partition key becomes this thing that you actually spend a lot of time thinking about and playing with. And I feel like we tell people you need to think really hard about your partitioning up front. But they try to find something in their data that they think is a good partition key. They'll be like, oh, well, all my users have an email, so suddenly I'm going to pick email and that's it. and this always ends up being usually a mistake because that data changes potentially. Users have emails that change, obviously. But even if it's something you own, like a GUID, you end up in situations where you can really efficiently store data by using composite partition keys, right? So, So imagine a situation where you have a users table and an orders table, right? And that's how it would be modeled in a traditional SQL database.
Right.
With Cosmos, what I would recommend somebody do is actually store all that data in the same database. So you can have any point read you need to do is just looking up by ID.
Right.
And then when you store the relationships, use the partition key as sort of this overloaded index of how to query your data.
Okay.
So you can imagine a partition key having be a combination of the user ID
and the order number.
Or just user ID dash orders.
Right.
And then that partition will contain all of the user's order data. So I think when you start thinking about data in that way, and you can get really creative, and we definitely see people store their entire relational database in one Cosmos database because they don't need to have separate tables for everything. They just store this graph of data.
That's interesting. I'm just trying to get my head around it is all, because I'm pretty used to relational databases like PostgreSQL. And then I've done some things with things like MongoDB and stuff like that. But yeah, typically it's stuff that it's like, it's like this set of data, and that set of data, right? And they don't necessarily interconnect that much.
Yeah. I think the best way in my mind, when I try to get people to understand this, is that you're thinking about your data not as this like set structured thing,
right?
But something that's a little more fluid. You think about it refactoring it like you refactor your code.
Okay.
So you find query patterns that say this is a primary query pattern that we're running into, and those can change over time, right?
Right.
Some new user comes in, wants a new feature, suddenly you have a new query pattern, and then you have to think about, well, how do I take my data now and store it in a way that is efficient for those query patterns?
I gotcha.
And so that's where you start approaching these things like using partition key in sort of novel, interesting ways, storing multiple copies of documents, storing data twice in order to, have it be queried in different ways.
Yeah, but then you have to make sure that all of that is being kept up to date and things like that.
There certainly is a cost and an overhead to that. So Cosmos does have some stuff that will help you there. So we talked about change feed already, but there is Cosmos is transactional.
Right.
So transactions are written in JavaScript. So if you want to execute a transaction, transactions are restricted to a single partition.
Okay.
But if you want to execute a transaction, you can write it in JavaScript, and that will be actually executed in Cosmos.
Okay.
So we have a nice little query language for doing that in Cosmos.
Right. So essentially what you can do is if you are storing 2 copies for 2 different query patterns, you can set your database up so that it keeps them in sync. When you update one, it automatically updates the other and does that all as part of a single transaction so that if one fails, the other one fails and things like that.
Yeah. Usually between transactions, JavaScript transactions, and between change feed, you can get pretty far. It does certainly put a little bit more onus on the application to handle those edge cases, right?
Right.
Okay, I failed to write data in some way, now what?
Yeah. And I did talk quite a bit with them about, just some projects I'm working on, and one of them is just tracking podcast downloads.
Yeah.
And it did occur to me that, I could set up some Azure function that essentially tracks the download and saves the information to Cosmos DB. And so what you're telling me then is that I could actually then subscribe to the change feed. And they did talk about this, but they didn't go into change feed and this is how this all works. But so then I would use the change feed and essentially say, okay, so when it records the download, then it goes and updates the hourly number, the daily number, and the monthly number or something.
Definitely.
And then the next time there's a query, when somebody looks up that information, then it says, okay, here's all the download numbers, and they're just all up to date.
Yep. Yeah. You could just do it exactly like that.
Yep. But then I don't have to go and generate the aggregate every time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that you can at least have it be sort of this isolated logic that doesn't have to, depend on other things in your application.
Yep. Now, in the failure case, how do I get notified about that?
So Cosmos, the SDK, will do retries for you, right? And there's ways to configure that. If something actually fails to write, you'll get an exception back from the SDK, right?
Okay.
It'll say something broke, and we've retried a certain number of times. It'll give you that information, and then it's kind of up to you what to do next.
That makes sense. And then, what if something fails in an Azure function off of the change feed?
That's a good question. I'm not as familiar with how the Azure functions, how their failure loop works. Do they have a way to track those and sort of queue off failures?
I would imagine they do. I'm going to have to go back in time and ask those guys.
Okay.
But yeah. I guess the other thing is that, is there some kind of, I guess you would just build that into the Azure function if you needed some kind of rollback capability off of that, right?
Yeah, I think so. You definitely would have to do a little more yourself to handle that situation. But if you can do it within a Cosmos transaction, that's probably the ideal way.
Right.
Because that will handle the rollback for you. If the JavaScript function fails at any point.
If anything fails in there, it'll just roll it back.
Rolls back anything you did in there, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the other thing, though, is if I have a primary data set that's driving the changes in the other ones, I may not want it to roll back, right? I may want to just keep that primary in there and then, run some function on my own that makes sure it's up to date.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is really interesting just from that standpoint. Well, what about scaling? How big can I get before I start bumping up against that SLA?
It's unlimited, right? So it scales out horizontally across these partitions, and the way it's designed, it is literally unlimited. That's fundamentals of Cosmos, which is pretty impressive, and it really sort of lives up to the hype there. Something I've personally been impressed since I've joined the team is that it really, at large scale, actually performs how they say it's going to perform.
Nice. My friend AJ that's on the show, typically, he would put an obligatory, it's not unlimited because you're going to run out of disk space eventually. But what you're saying is we've never had anybody pump that much data into it.
Yes, that's correct. So there is a limit in the physical world to how much hard disk space there is. So at some point, we won't be able to buy anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm not so worried about that. We'll find new ways to store stuff.
Okay. If you have that problem, well, that's probably a good problem to have because that means your business is doing very well.
I hope so. So if somebody wants to get in and start playing with Cosmos and they're thinking, oh, this looks really interesting, and maybe they really like the MongoDB model, or maybe they do want to see what the SQL capabilities are. I mean, how do you get started with it?
So we have a really great option for that. If you go to trycosmosdb.com, you will get a free account that you don't even need to have anything else set up in the Azure portal. As long as you got like a Microsoft login, it will just set up a account for you, and you can start playing around with the database.
Right.
And that database goes away after a certain amount of time. I think right now it's like a month.
Right.
But you could just spin up another one then.
Trycosmosdb.com.
Correct.
And then if I actually decide that this is something that I want to use, I can think of a number of use cases. I mean, one is that I host my app in Azure, and so I just, it all just connects nicely, I would assume. But what if I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to host my app off in the cloud somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So I have a server somewhere, or I'm running my app, in somebody else's cloud, and I'm thinking, yeah, but Cosmos DB looks really nice, and I'd like to send my data across the web all the way to the other cloud and use all the capabilities there. Is that a possibility?
Totally possible. We definitely have like a fair number of people doing that because Cosmos does have some very unique capabilities. Mm-hmm. Cosmos is all, the base layer is all over HTTP. So all you get is a connection endpoint and a key that you provide to the SDK, and it will call it from wherever you are in the world. So the nice part there, and with the multi-region stuff, is that if you want to set up in other data centers, if you want to set up your app on-prem or on other cloud providers, great. You can still talk to Cosmos, and there'll probably be a region really close that will still get you the latency you want.
And so if I'm setting up my app and I'm saying, okay, go talk to Cosmos DB, get my key.
Yeah.
You said that there's a JavaScript SDK that I can pull in. So is that just npm install Cosmos DB, or?
Yeah, it's under Azure -Cosmos. So at Azure -Cosmos. /Cosmos.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We're kind of trying to centralize some of our SDK stuff so that it's all under
that makes sense.
A little better, better unified story. And so it just recently moved there.
Nice.
We just rewrote it this last year. It's all in TypeScript now.
Ooh, fancy.
I might be a little bit biased, but I think it's actually like really, really good.
Nice.
So it's something I would want to use.
Right. You just install that, and then is there some kind of ORM that's set up for it, or is it just make this query, or what levels do you get for that?
So the reading and writing is pretty straightforward. Cosmos has this concept of databases and containers, so that's kind of the hierarchy. We have a database contains several containers, and then a container contains items within them. Those are the actual documents. You can create and edit databases and containers and delete them as well, all through the SDK. So that all kind of happens in the SDK.
Right.
And then the items themselves, reading and writing is very straightforward. You just provide objects that get serialized to JSON.
Right.
The SDK, the fancy stuff it does is around querying. So querying in Cosmos, there's kind of two ways to do it. You can either do a single partition query, where you give it a partition key, and then it will only execute that query against that individual partition. That's sort of the primary way, and hopefully your data is structured that way. But we talked about this before. Sometimes you want to scan your database. Sometimes you want to look at stuff across a bunch of different partitions. You need to do analytics, stuff like that. And that all works, but the SDK does a lot more heavy lifting there. So it will actually go talk to all the partitions, figure out which ones it needs to talk to, figure out which kind of operations it needs to do, and then sort of aggregate results for it.
I gotcha. Cool. So what am I not thinking about that I need to be thinking about?
Other cool stuff with Cosmos, we have an emulator. The emulator is very neat. There's a good part and a bad part. The good part, it is a very faithful emulator because it is actually emitted from the Cosmos source code.
Right.
So this isn't something that we wrote separately to mimic Cosmos. Like there's occasions on the emulator you'll get a region not supported error and things like that, right? Like it is the Cosmos source code under the hood. So that means it's very faithful.
Right.
Unfortunately, it only runs on Windows. So you can run it in a Docker container on Windows. You can run it on Windows. But we definitely it's on our roadmap, and it's something we're trying to figure out how to support.
Fair enough. I mean, we get these things a piece at a time everywhere. So yeah. And I know a lot of people are doing JavaScript on Windows. I know a lot of people aren't. So it just depends on where you're at.
I really try to have empathy for both sides. So I do. I split my time. About half my time I develop on my Mac, and half the time I'm on my Windows box.
Gotcha. So I go set up Cosmos DB, start playing with it. It sounds like if I have to go and muck through the data myself, I can also just do one-off queries to modify data, and that's not a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. It's we sort of want to support all of those use cases.
Right.
Other NoSQL databases, it's like you can't query that way at all.
Right.
At least with Cosmos, you can. Like it is possible to do. It just might take a long time.
Right. So if I'm building a query with the Cosmos DB SDK, am I kind of pushed toward SQL as a default, or
So the SDK supports SQL. That is like the primary case. If you're using the Mongo API, we just recommend you use all the open source Mongo tooling already out there, and we build the APIs with all of those in mind.
Right. Same with Cassandra.
Same with Cassandra. Same with I think I forgot to mention at the beginning, but we have a Gremlin API.
Mm-hmm.
So if
you did mention it, but
I did. Okay.
Yeah.
So all that works with all the open source Gremlin tools. So all those we strive to like meet the open source community where they are.
Right.
Not have a separate new SDK.
No, that makes sense. So how long has Cosmos been around? Because I know that it kind of changed names a few times and kind of changed focus a few times.
It's going on at least 4 years now. I've been with the team just about a year, and right before I joined, they changed the name to Cosmos DB from Document DB.
Yeah,
which is not confusing at all because Amazon now has a service called Document DB, which also has a Mongo API.
Right.
So I've definitely had a few issues come my way where I'm like, I'm sorry, you're on the wrong cloud provider.
Yeah,
you're talking to the wrong person.
That's funny.
So
cool. I don't know if I have any other questions. I guess one other thing that kind of came through my head was if I need to like copy my database so that I can do staging and things like that, is that pretty easy?
Right now, we don't support just like a click and copy kind of thing, which is unfortunate. It's definitely something we get a lot of requests for. The best way to do that is using the change feed. So there's ways with the change feed to go back in time and sort of go through your entire database.
Okay.
And there are ways to do it where you can have via the change feed like an entire copy made of your database.
I gotcha.
And that's sort of the way we recommend doing it. But it's certainly a pain point we're aware of.
Cool.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Well, the last part of the show that we do typically is picks.
Okay.
And this just things you want to shout out about. I think everybody that I've talked to, they've all said, well, Game of Thrones is kind of the thing that everybody's watching, so I'm going to pick something else.
Okay.
But, it could be a TV show, it could be a video game, it could be a coding tool. But yeah, it's just kind of our way to give people an idea of, hey, what are you into these days? So,
oh man, what am I into these days? That's a really good question. I think my current sort of like minor obsession is that they just released Final Fantasy X, the remaster for the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, nice.
And that was like, I was sort of coming of age right when that game came out.
Right.
And so it's sort of me going back and being able to like play all this stuff when I was playing when I was a teenager and sort of relive it a little bit. So I'm very, very much enjoying that.
I can't tell if that makes you really old or really young because I didn't ever play it.
So I think it came out, I was maybe 15. That would have been 2000 or something like that, 2001.
Yeah.
So
good deal.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've been playing a lot of Breath of the Wild on my Switch, and that's just fun.
Breath of the Wild is such an amazing game.
Yeah.
I actually just also restarted Breath of the Wild, just, do it all over again.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, my wife, she's really into the Lego style games.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're a little bit cheesy. I play them with my wife and kids, but yeah, if I'm picking a game for me to play, it's something else.
Me and my wife play Overcooked. That's our game.
Overcooked?
Yeah, are you not familiar with Overcooked? It's a great like co-op game. So you run this little restaurant, and you have to like make things. So somebody has to go get the burger meat, and somebody has to cook the burger. And
oh wow,
you have these little characters you kind of take around to different parts of the restaurant to do the different parts of making the meal. So it's these little, maybe 2-3 minute long,
right.
Games where you're trying to get as many of these meals come, as
Right.
possible, right? And they're kind of, the orders are coming in across the top of the screen. So
That makes sense. And so you're communicating a whole lot. Okay, you make this and I'll do this. And
it definitely makes for some fun stuff, because sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go well, or somebody drops the ball and then you're kind of in the living room yelling at each other. But we have a lot of fun doing it.
that sounds like fun. Is that on the Switch?
Yeah. So there's Overcooked, and they just came out with the Overcooked 2.
Okay.
So there's 2 of them now.
Sounds like fun. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I want to shout out about. You do 5 of these in 3 days, and it's like, I'm kind of out of things.
Yeah.
One thing that I am going to pick, and I'm actually wearing it. So I got kind of a hip pouch. I didn't want a fanny pack, we'll put it that way. But at the same time, when I go to the conferences, a lot of times I need a place to put stickers and business cards and things like that. And I don't want to take my backpack, because typically when I'm meeting people, I don't need my laptop. And so I got this. It was like $20 on Amazon. And so it has a strap that goes around your leg and a strap that goes around your waist.
Yeah.
And then it's just a convenient place to throw stuff, and it doesn't look as dorky as a fanny pack. So I'm going to pick that. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, folks. But
I like it. I definitely am very particular about my backpacks. Mine, I don't know what I did with mine here, but I only buy Osprey backpacks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the only backpack brand I'll ever buy. They have like this lifetime unlimited any reason warranty.
Oh, nice.
And I have definitely put some Osprey packs through their paces, and I've been like, hey, this zipper broke, and they send it to them. They send me right back fixed.
Oh, nice. That's good to know.
Yeah.
The backpack I'm using, I'm trying to remember the brand, but I ran into them at CES, and they're like, hey, take this bag and give it a review, and I really love it. So I'll have to remember what it's called, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. But 2 of the areas in the backpack, they zip all the way down to the bottom, so you can lay it open. So when you travel, you don't have to pull your laptop out because it's on top.
Yeah, it's just sitting there.
And it's got a ton of room in it for all kinds of stuff. And I've really, really liked having it. So I do need to post a video review of it now that I've been using it for a while. But yeah, it's easily one of the nicer backpacks that I've had, just because it has a ton of space in it and it does all that stuff. Now I have TSA PreCheck, so I just throw my bag on the conveyor belt and walk away.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you do a lot of traveling and you don't have that convenience, I can see it being really nice, because you just unzip it and you just lay it folded completely open on your...
Pull it right out.
You don't even have to pull it out because it's on top.
Oh, got it. So that they can just send it through scan just like that.
Yeah, because they can see the laptop sitting there in the backpack.
Interesting.
So you just send it through. CES tends to give us the cheapo see-through plastic backpacks.
Yeah.
I freaking hate those things. I have like 3 of them.
You should do a whole show on conference swag and who gives the best swag.
I should.
I'll give a little shout out. Fastly. The company Fastly.
Uh-huh.
I've been to a couple of their conferences, and by far they have given me the best swag I've ever had. Like,
oh, nice.
They give me sweatshirts that I actually wear on an everyday basis because they're really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, like you look them up online, and they're like $90 sweatshirts, and they have like a little logo in the corner, so it's not obtrusive.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing I think is funny is at conferences they give you the T-shirts, and they have their logo like real big across your chest, right? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, sometimes they're really nicely made, and so I'll wear them because they're comfortable.
Yeah.
But most of those, they just sit in my closet because I'm just like, they're not my favorite shirt.
Yeah.
And so if they put something clever on it, something, I've seen a few shirts out here. It looks like somebody's giving out shirts on like debugging, and it's got, some funny stuff on it or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I could wear that to a tech event, and, people would laugh, or people would enjoy it. But yeah, if it's just a logo, meh. But yeah. Cool. Are they giving out the sweatshirts here at Build?
I haven't seen Fastly here.
Oh, okay.
That's a good question. I don't know. I was at another conference. They gave out Yeti water, things like the nice big like Yeti, things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they give out good stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I was at NGConf for Angular last week, and they always give out a ton of great swag.
Nice.
So cool.
Okay.
Well, if people want to find you online, where do they go?
So I'm at South Pole Steve on Twitter, on GitHub, pretty much anywhere on the internet you see.
South Pole Steve. Is there a story behind that?
There is a story behind that. So my first job out of college was I worked in Antarctica on a physics research project.
Oh, wow.
So I came to coding late. I didn't go to school for that.
Right.
I was doing other mechanical engineering stuff. And so, I went to the South Pole for a month right after college. It was a blast, and I had a lot of fun.
Nice.
And now I've never been back, so I feel like I need to go back to like renew my credentials, right? Because people always ask me about it, and I'm like, it was like a decade ago, right?
Yeah, it's not a destination a lot of people go to though. So
it's certainly unique, but I will say like it's fun. I'm glad I went. I don't know if I would go back. Like takes a long time to get there. It's very cold. It's very after the first week you're kind of like, okay, well. Now what? I'm at the bottom of the earth, and it's boring and white and cold in every direction.
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, glad you made it back.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, folks, and we will catch you all next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.